Hey there, and welcome to That Independent Streak. I'm your host, Wendy Campbell, and you're in the right place. If you're looking for storytellers, if you are looking for individuals who can kind of help you get to that next place in life, I think this is really becoming where we wanted this to go. Now, we started with an intention of health and wellness and travel, and added leadership, business development. We've had some very interesting conversations around HR, as well as your dream development, as well as really kind of taking that next step and into entrepreneurship and solopreneurship. And it's been an amazing journey. I've really enjoyed every conversation this year. And I'm kind of sad to see this year close out, but I'm very excited to see what comes next year. Now, my guest today is an amazing individual, one of my favorite people on the planet. He's a mentor, he's a great friend, he's my boss. Paul Archer and his wife, Carol Archer, left last summer for Africa to do a mission with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And we discussed it really from the get-go that we were going to do some podcasts. Now, we originally recorded one with Carol in October, but the recording gremlins took the recording and it was never heard from again. So we got back together in November, and then a little bit of sickness has swept through my house. So it's taken me a few minutes to get this one out, but still one of the best of all, just because he's such an amazing person to talk to and one of my favorite storytellers. He once told me a story that started in Albuquerque and finished 8 hours later in Monument, Colorado. So, he's got some talents. This one is great fun. We discuss a little bit about politics, a little bit about government, a lot about helping people and being in that good space. And if you enjoy the podcast, by all means, it would mean so much to me if you could just subscribe it, or even share it with those around you. Next year, like I said, we're going to be diving deeper. The hopes of doubling the number of shows that we do, I think really is my goal, but we'll see where it all goes. So we'd love to hear your comments, love to get your insights, and we'd love for you to stick around and listen all the way through to Paul Archer.
You have quite the setup where my headset died.
Oh,
I ordered a new headset from Amazon. It just takes forever to get things. With Amazon, you buy it from a company who buys it from Amazon and they mark it up. So they pay what you pay, then they put margin on it and they put freight on it.
Right.
So anything you buy from Amazon costs about twice as much as what you would pay for it.
So isn't there another exchange like Amazon where you can go and buy those things and then it's just a different
there's
process?
a online exchange called Jumia, but it doesn't have much. I mean, it has stuff and we've bought stuff on it, but it doesn't have a lot of things, like looking for a headset. I'm buying a new headset. I had no headsets. I wanted to buy a second screen here at the apartment. Had one screen I didn't trust because it was $70. And that was all it had. And so I actually bought that from our the church's IT provider here, who brought it by, and I think I paid $380 for it or something like that. It would have been cheaper buying a display there. But yeah, most of the things, a lot of the things you want, we do use Jumia, but a lot of the things that we want, we don't need that much, frankly, but a lot of the things we want, you can't find on Jumia. We went to a store today called China Outlet that we heard about. And
how was it?
Well, I think it's just everything in the store is made in China. And
so it was like Walmart?
No, okay. It was a big store. It was a big store, but had no brands that you'd recognize, and had some good stuff, but also I was looking for headsets. Didn't have any just headset. It didn't have any displays. I walked down the cable section, didn't have any HDMI cables.
Do you think that's just where you are and kind of where you are in the world and demand? Like there's not much demand, I can imagine, for what you need, right?
Yeah, partly. I mean, this is it's a wealthy African country, but it's a poor country by absolute standards, right?
Right.
So there's some level of that. But you have the whole question, Wendy, of how do you get an economy rolling, and how do you get it to where there are an ever-growing number of good jobs for people to do. And that's how you start bringing a society out of poverty. But they don't have fundamental things like we have. They don't have the means for individuals to create capital. So it's really hard to buy a home here. Home ownership is really, really low. Well, most people start to build equity in their life by buying a home. Now, even in the United States, we have about 70% home ownership. And during the crazy years of Carter fair housing, and then doubling down on it in Clinton years with double down on fair housing and the elimination of Glass-Steagall, with this notion that they wanted everybody to be able to afford a house or buy a house. And so they started doing loans to people who would never repay them. So when I was young, I learned that there's three things you have to get a loan. You have to have character. In other words, you have to have a demonstrated propensity to pay back debts. You have to have collateral. So you have to have some way for your lender to be made whole. And you have to have capacity. In other words, you got to have a job sufficient to
You have to have a credit score, and you have to have a job, right?
Yeah, that's part of capacity. That's one of the three C's. Well, when we got into the crazy, stupid years that Democrats brilliantly hung on Republicans, but it was actually Democrats' fault, they started making millions of loans to people who are never going to pay them back. And the conceit, the people in the mortgage industry knew they weren't going to pay them back. But, you know, when you're making billions and billions and billions of dollars of profit, and the senior people in those Wall Street banks and large banks are making massive amounts of money just trading mortgage-backed securities back and forth, and they see no downside. So when you look at the collapse, nobody went to jail, nobody lost their personal fortune on that side of things. And we bailed them all out. And to boot, we paid the bonuses of the people in the banks who were party to crashing the economy, because the banks argued that without the bonuses, they'd leave. Well, my response was, where would they go?
Right. Isn't that what The Big Short is all about?
Oh, yeah. Like at the end of The Big Short, Ryan Gosling says that, well, will this ever happen again? No, because hundreds of people went to jail involved. And he stops and he goes, oh, wait, only one person went to jail.
Right.
Nobody suffered the consequence for it. And we're now teeing up our next crash.
Right.
Okay. So the whole stupid Democrat thing was that they want everyone to be able to buy a house, and the government will guarantee the loan, and the government's safe guaranteeing loans because real estate always goes up. Well, real estate doesn't always go up. And when you do 100% loan to value loan and somebody defaults on the loan and they start defaulting at the rate of 10 or 12% of total loans, suddenly you depress the whole real estate market. You now have this dynamic of mark-to-market valuation on balance sheets. So banks now have to mark down their assets. To a bank, a loan is an asset.
Right.
And so banks have to start marking down their assets. Well, suddenly they no longer meet their liquidity requirements of the banking regulations. And so banks came to the verge of failure. The federal government had to step in and rescue them, although there are many people who argue, and I agree with it, we should have just let the banks fail.
I agree. Don't they lose their credit rating, like, or their credits? I'm thinking their loan rating. Don't they lose that?
Well, you would think so, but remember what happened is the banks that were going down, like Countrywide Funding, which was a big mortgage broker and mortgage facilitator, they got picked up by somebody for pennies. And there were multiple banks that just got acquired by bigger banks. Merrill Lynch, which had been playing heavily in mortgage-backed securities. Merrill Lynch was nearly bankrupt. And so the government came in and engineered a buyout of Merrill Lynch by Bank of America. So they saved Merrill Lynch as a company. The people who were at Merrill Lynch and who had their life savings in Merrill Lynch stock got screwed, but they got screwed not really. I mean, their company was doing really stupid things and they were part of the company, but the company itself was preserved by merging with Bank of America. And then the through TARP, the federal government came in and pumped billions of dollars into Bank of America and Citibank and Chase and so on. The one bank that didn't want to take money was, I think, Key Bank, because they hadn't done any of the stupid stuff.
Right.
And the federal government made them take money. So they told them, every bank's taking money, you have to take money. So you remember that Obama liked to say that he saved General Motors. Well, actually, TARP saved General Motors, and that was Bush. That wasn't Obama. And secondly, it still went bankrupt.
Right.
So General Motors still went bankrupt. And Ford, on the other hand, said, we're not going to take any federal money. We're not going to take any bailout money. We'll manage through it. And
which
Ford
is how business
managed through
should
it.
run. That's just how business should run.
Yeah. So now coming back to Africa, you have very low home ownership rates. Like I know one person in the office who owns a home, and they all have good jobs for Kenya. Everybody who works in that office has a good job for Kenya, but they don't. Only one owns a home. Well, when I look at Carol and me, we bought our first home. We gained some equity as it appreciated a little bit. I made a little more money. We were able to sell it and buy a little bigger home. That home appreciated some. We were able to sell it and buy a little bigger home, and so on. And so you trade up homes multiple times, and then you're building equity in the home. And so when I started Automated Business Products, I had personal cash to put in, but I also needed a line of credit. And I didn't have enough cash. I mean, there were many times, Wendy, that we were banging right up against our line of credit limit. I mean, I watched cash like a hawk. And so I'd see our line of credit going, oh my gosh. And at one point, nobody in the company knows this. I don't think Andy even knows this.
Now they do.
At one point, we had to retire the line of credit every year. So we had to take it to zero and rest it every year.
Okay.
So we never exceeded the line of credit, but we had to take it to zero and rest it for a month every year. Well, in one particular year, we were running about $250,000 to $275,000 on our line of credit. I had no means to rest the line of credit. I mean, I had retirement savings, but I can't convert those without a huge tax consequence.
Right.
I had equity in my home. I didn't want to go take a second mortgage on my home to do that, right? So I needed $275,000 for a month. So I didn't really want to call my brothers. So I have a friend who I knew did what's called hard money lending. Do you know what hard money lending is?
Vaguely, yeah.
So hard money lending is somebody needs money and they don't have anywhere to go get it. And
it's like
because
a payday
they need
loan,
the
yeah.
money, well, it's kind of like a payday loan, but because they need the money and don't have anywhere conventional to go get it, they've got to get the money short term at very egregious interest rates and transaction fees. And so if you're somebody who does hard money lending, like my friend did, he loaned Wendy $200,000 for 2 months, and he'd charge you 18% interest for 2 months. So annualized, so he'd charge $36,000 in interest, and then you'd pay $6,000 of that for 2 months.
Right.
And then he'd charge you a $5,000 initiation fee. Right.
Right.
So I
that
knew he did that.
$200,000 cost you like 200 and somewhere around 18. Is that what I'm guessing? Yeah.
Yeah, for 60 days.
Yeah.
So if you annualize that return for somebody like that, and he turns that money 6 times in a year, on $200,000, he makes 6 times 18, which is $108,000,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's making 55% return on his money.
Mm-hmm.
That's hard to do, right? So anyway, I called the friend. I was hoping he would say, hey, Paul, you've helped me many times with things. Just, I'll tell you what, we're friends. I'll just do it. But no, same legal deal. Cost me.
Sounds like a good businessman.
I only had it 30 days, but I think it cost me like 12 grand for 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to retire that line of credit, right? Anyway, the equity that I had that allowed me to get the line of credit was my home, my personal residence equity.
Right.
So when you're here in Africa and you want to start a business, you don't own a home, you don't have any assets, nobody wants to lend you money. It's really hard to start creating capital. And then labor is consistently so cheap. Like our guard, who works 12 hours a day, makes 500 shillings a day.
What's the math
Which
equation
is,
to a dollar?
that's about $3.30 a day for 12 hours. So he washes our car every week, and I pay him 500 shillings to wash the car. So $3.30 I pay for him to wash the car. So I effectively pay him a whole day's wages to wash the car. I was driving a truck the church had lent to us. I paid him 1,000 shillings to wash the truck, $6.80. And he was like, whoa, thank you so much. Well, when labor is that cheap, and it's pervasive that labor is that cheap, there's very little mechanization. Because labor is cheaper than mechanization or technology. So you see all kinds of people on streets pulling hand carts down the street laden with goods. And they're right on the highway pulling a hand cart full of stuff. And I asked somebody local, how much does one of those guys make in a day? I mean, they walk kilometers a day pulling these hand carts.
Right.
And he said, oh, they'll make 500 shillings for pulling that hand cart all day long, every day. Well, if you have people who will do that and they'll move product, then why do you want to create sophisticated distribution systems with trucks and all of that kind of stuff? Right. So the cheap cost of labor continually holds down the mechanization of the society. Are we recording? We should be recording. This is Africa stuff.
I've got it recording right now. I even double checked this time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Weird glitch. But so let me ask you this. If that's the case, then do they have income taxes? Like how is there structure and infrastructure built in order to provide the roads, to provide jobs, and not that it's the government's role to provide jobs, but to set up the framework for advancements?
Well, no, not like we have it. So let's go back in time in the United States. So we're now talking about infrastructure in the United States.
Okay.
And the challenge in the United States is that when we talk about infrastructure and rebuilding our infrastructure, in terms of the total cost of the federal government, actually isn't that big of a nut. But it's a big nut because it's all deficit spending. It's all printed money, right?
Right.
And if you go back in time and the way federal budgeting worked, when we built like the interstate highway system, which is most of what we know now is, I mean, the Eisenhower Tunnel is named the Eisenhower Tunnel, not just because Dwight Eisenhower was president of the United States, but he was the guy who, under his leadership, we did the interstate highway system.
Right.
And so the vision that Eisenhower had in his 8 years, or someone shared with him, or whatever happened to get it through Congress and through the administrative branch, was that you would greatly assist the economy if we had a productive transportation system. And, once product gets to the United States, so most product gets to the United States by ship.
Right.
And it moves around the United States by rail or truck.
Right.
Okay. So you needed to have roads that trucks could get around, and you also needed to have roads so that people basically, tourism became unleashed because you could get most places fast in a car.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
And so we built this significant interstate highway system that we've just been, not to the degree we did in 1952 or 3. We continue to do upgrades to it. But if you go back to those years, we had no Medicare, we had no Medicaid, and Social Security was barely used.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Medicare and Medicaid did not start until the Great Society with Johnson. And Social Security wasn't used because nobody lived to 65.
Right. Wow.
So Social Security was created during the Great Depression. Nobody was living to 65. And so you had effectively very little government spending on entitlements. And so we had more than significant tax revenue to pay for defense, to pay for infrastructure, to pay for law enforcement, to pay for forestry, and things like that. Well, what's happened, the 3 big things that have happened since then is, 1, people are living long. So Social Security is a huge cost to the government.
Right.
2, Medicare was created. And Johnson said when he created Medicaid that this would never be more than a $2 or $3 billion a year expense to the government. Well, it's now a hundreds of billions of dollars a year expense to the government.
Right.
Okay. And Medicaid is a similar cost to the government. And the great folly of Obama was in the Affordable Care Act. All the Affordable Care Act really did in expanding coverage didn't make anything more affordable.
No,
it
it's
just
stupid.
greatly expanded the eligibility for Medicaid. And I don't know if you remember, do you remember the Cornhusker kickback and the Louisiana Purchase?
I remember the Louisiana Purchase. Like
okay,
the
well,
actual
so the Louisiana Purchase is when Jefferson bought the whole Mississippi
right
River Valley from France for pennies per acre, right?
Okay.
But what that's referring to is when the Affordable Care Act was passed, as it was teeing up to be passed, Medicare is Medicaid is 50% paid by the federal government and 50% paid by states. Okay.
Okay.
And so any increase in Medicaid created a significant burden on states, which states don't have the ability to deficit spend the way federal governments were. And our governor at the time, Hickenlooper, who's a decent businessman, but he was a dummy regarding that. He was like, well, fine, bring it on. There were Democrat senators in Louisiana and Nebraska, and their governors went to them and said, if this bill passed as written, it will bankrupt the state. We cannot afford the increase in Medicaid recipients. It will absolutely bankrupt the state. So those 2 senators went to Obama and said, we can't support it. Well, in those days, they respected the 60 vote filibuster rule, and they hadn't created all kinds of end runs on that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had to have those 2 guys' votes. So Obama told Nebraska and Louisiana that we'll write into the bill that we'll pay 100% of the expansion of Medicaid in Louisiana and 100% in Nebraska of the expansion of Medicaid. Okay.
Okay.
So the 2 senators said, okay, you got our votes. Well, somebody who actually read the 2,700 page bill said, wait a minute, what's this? Why does Nebraska and Louisiana get that and nobody else does?
Right.
So that's why it's called the Louisiana Purchase and the Cornhusker Kickback. So Obama was in a position where he had 48 other states who started saying, yeah, gosh, we've done the math too. It doesn't work for us either. So they said, okay, we'll pay 100% of the expansion of Medicaid for every state for a period of time. And then the expansion of Medicaid, excuse me, will start to ratchet down to where I think the expansion dollars cap out with the states at 10 or 20%, the federal government with the balance. They never get to 50-50, but it's still significant.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're at about that time. So every state is now facing this increased Medicaid expense for the dramatic increase of Medicaid recipients, which was about 18 million people took on Medicaid through the Affordable Care Act. Well, when you do that, Wendy, and you have entitlement spending that's now 70% of the federal budget. So our entitlement spending is literally 70% of the federal budget. We now have politicians say, well, nobody wants to pay for infrastructure. Well, yeah, we can't, because you're giving all the money away
Right.
to people who don't work and pay their own way. Right.
So, yes. I have many questions from all of that, though. So if you
Okay.
go back all the way to the inception of Medicaid.
Yeah.
Did Medicaid thereby almost create big pharma? Because through Medicaid, when you've got negotiations that are happening on pricing that are happening behind the end user, right? So the consumer isn't necessarily part of the negotiation of the cost of Medicaid,
Right.
because that's a negotiation with the government. The government saying, well, we'll pay for half of that, state pays for half of that, consumer pays ungodly amounts of money for Medicaid, and well, not for Medicaid, but for insurance. Suddenly you
Right.
have big pharma that's out of control, dictating what and when and how people should medicate themselves, but also making it so unaffordable that you pay into the insurance scam. And yet when you go to the doctor doesn't, like, you're still paying out of pocket for so much of your expenses that it doesn't equate equally over the course of the year, right? So is one causing the other? And if so, can we abolish one or the other so that, the natural consumer can go back to just deciding when they need health care?
Well, the question is, the question is there a will to, and is there a can do? Okay, so there's definitely a can do. I mean, absolutely, we could do that. But is there a will to do it? Well, if you say, is there a will to do it? There isn't a will to do it amongst the people who could actually make it happen. Because have you ever heard of Eisenhower's farewell address?
Yes. I can't recite it, but you can.
Do you remember what Eisenhower warned the country about in his farewell address?
Wasn't his warning more about the military-industrial complex?
Yes.
Okay.
So what Eisenhower had witnessed coming through World War II. So if you go back, after World War I, we had a period of peace, and then World War II hit, and we had the largest military spending in the history of the country.
Right.
And we actually ran huge deficits to prosecute the war. But after the war, we got back to balanced budgets and actually paid off the deficit. Okay. But what we had created was this massive industrial complex supporting the military system.
Right.
Okay. And we had all of these contractors who were building tanks and guns and airplanes and so on, and you name it, right? And they were making massive amounts of money. So, for example, this is just like a tangential thing. The company that acquired our company in Utah in 1988 was a company called Alco Standard.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the formation of Alco Standard was a guy named Tink Vail and his brother and a third guy. Tink had this idea to start a new company, and I won't go into the what's and wherefores. Interesting story sometime, because it was a great story until they ruined it. And Tink wanted to, Tink had made a fortune because he sold electric motors during the war. He was a salesman.
Okay.
Selling electric motors. And those electric motors were used in all kinds of military apparatus. And so he made a personal fortune selling electric motors during the war because the factory capacity of every electric motor company was completely exhausted by the war effort. And so, you know, you didn't really have to try to sell, you just had to answer the phone. But the funny thing to me, as I think about it, his company never thought back to, you know, pre-war compensation plans and during war compensation plans where things were flying off the shelf.
Right.
And they were writing Tink big checks. Nobody said, why are we paying Tink? The orders just come in. I mean, I guess the sloppiness would derive from the fact that the company was making so much money. Who
Right.
cares? Right.
Right.
Well, so Tink took that money and started buying companies with it and created what became a public company and made Tink a far wealthier man. So we created the military industrial complex, and Eisenhower warned about it. And he warned that you have to feed the military industrial complex. So you have to be careful with the military industrial complex, because once you've created the military industrial complex, there's lobbyists and they donate money to politicians and they exert influence over politicians and so on. And so they have a vested interest in continuing to keep the war machine going even in times of peace. Now, we've created a new industrial complex, and it's far bigger than the military industrial complex.
Is that the post-war cleanup?
No, it's called the healthcare industrial complex. So
right.
we have a healthcare industrial complex, and it's far bigger than the military industrial complex. Okay.
Right.
And so if you go back in time, back into the early 60s, for example, we spent about 3% of GDP on healthcare. So we spent about 3% of every dollar in the economy on healthcare. Healthcare was affordable. Healthcare businesses weren't minting money. Doctors, for example, had good livings, but they didn't have in some specialties, you know, ways to make living that the vast majority of Americans could never touch. Hospital systems were typically private or owned by nonprofits. So this whole thing where you go to Costco and they hit you up for money for Children's Hospital, that's a vestige of the past, where Children's Hospital was actually a nonprofit who didn't make money and they needed donations from the community to break even.
Right.
Today, Children's Hospital is a huge enterprise that makes massive amounts of money and pays its senior management seven-figure incomes. The highest paid people in the healthcare system now are not the doctors, they're the executives in the healthcare companies. Okay.
Right. Right.
And so they hit you up for money. What amazes me about Children's is the audacity of them to continue to ask us for donations at Costco.
Right.
When they're putting north of 10% to the bottom line, they're a multi-billion-dollar operation. Every time Costco would ask me that, I'd say, no, I don't want to do that. And they'd say, why, you don't want to give money to the kids? And I said, it doesn't go to the kids. What do you mean? I said, there's plenty of money for the kids. Medicaid takes care of that. And really? I said, they're 3 to 4 times more profitable than you on rate of return. Really? Yes. A better question would be asking Children's Hospital, when people check out of the hospital, if they'd like to donate to Costco.
Right.
You're frankly a more worthy business charity. Now, the silly thing about Children's Hospital, and many like them, Centaur Health, CU Health, etc., is they're healthcare nonprofits, which means they've created this tax dodge where they don't have to pay income tax. Okay. And so they can therefore pay their executive huge amounts of money, and they come up with kind of tax dodges. And frankly, we should close that loophole. So we created this healthcare industrial complex. And the healthcare industrial complex was fed by the expansion of originally Medicare, the creation and expansion of Medicare, the creation of Medicaid, the expansion of Medicaid under Obama. And so now you have literally trillions of dollars going into the healthcare system. And it keeps munching more and more money, and the system has to be fed, we think. And nobody has the courage to say, we're all getting screwed, which we are. We're all getting screwed. And so if you roll the clock back to the early 60s, people got health care, they could go to the doctor. I mean, they make the argument that, well, the reason healthcare is so expensive is because of technology. Well, wait a minute. Why doesn't that work in any other business?
Right. Well, and
Technology
furthermore,
reduces cost.
so in order to feed that machine, is there an argument to be made for keeping the border open? Because then you're bringing people in who are instantly on Medicaid and Medicare because they can't afford, so they've got to get state assistance, right? They're being housed and sheltered and taken in by the system, which is then obviously putting them in the same system, which then we also have to pay for because somebody's got to pay for the overall Medicare expense. Is that right? Is that what's happening?
Well, there's lots of business arguments to keep the border open. One is cheap labor coming across the border.
Sure.
One is ongoing consumers. And so if you're a healthcare company, you don't care who the people are, you just care somebody's going to pay.
Right.
And so many of those people come in and they start taking advantage of our benefit system. Right.
Right.
And so, yeah, sure, we have all kinds of perverse rewards in the system. And we've created a monster that nobody's willing to kill. And frankly, killing the monster is, you don't have to say, I'm going to kill you, the monster. You just change the dynamic. And the simple way that you change the dynamic is you end government insurance, which is a market distorting force because it's a price fixing mechanism.
Right.
You end government insurance, you end business employer-based insurance. Everyone's insured individually. If their businesses want to contribute to it, that's up to them.
Mm-hmm. You
have individuals who start to behave like consumers. They start to shop insurance companies. They start to shop providers. They start to shop procedural things. They start to shop drugs. So if you go through every part of the healthcare system, we're getting gamed. We're getting gamed by the pharmaceutical companies. We're getting gamed by the medical device makers. We're getting gamed by the hospital systems. We're getting gamed by the insurance companies. And if you look at the insurance companies, the dummies in the Obama administration said, well, we're going to put a medical loss ratio requirement in that says the insurance companies have to pay 85% of their premiums in claims. And so that will prevent them from denying claims. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, insurance companies then said, oh, the game is no longer cost containment. The game is revenue driving. So insurance companies stopped trying to negotiate down prices. They wanted prices to go up. And then they could increase premiums because they needed to have prices rising because their rate of profit return is now lower, but it's lower on much bigger dollars. And so they're actually making more money now than they were making before the Affordable Care Act. So United Healthcare, for example, I own the stock. Since the Affordable Care Act passed, United Healthcare has appreciated by 12 times.
That's a lot. Yeah.
That's a lot. So my best performing investment assets are that stock and my healthcare mutual funds. They've outperformed every other sector of the economy since the Affordable Care Act. So they're not doing anything illegal. They're just simply behaving according to their own best interests. And people always do that.
Right.
Right. So you can't, what government officials do, typically people on the left, is they discard human nature. And they forget that people will always act in their own self-interest. And so consequently, the beauty of capitalism is when capitalism is allowed to work with everybody behaving in their own self-interest, the invisible hand does two things. It brings value to everybody, and it creates a better creation and distribution of wealth system. Doesn't create equality, but the society at large is better off under capitalism than it would have been under socialism.
Right.
Okay, now your question about Africa. So remember, these are young countries. So colonialism for most of these countries didn't end until 50 or 60 years ago. So imagine that we're the United States and the British just left in 1970 or 1960.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So Kenya was founded in like 1966. And when the British left, it was like, okay, see ya, you're on your own. And so this collective of people who had been run by the British suddenly were self-governed. And, you know, you could question whether the people who took over the government of the country were actually had the skill and experience necessary to manage a modern economy,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they're young democracies. Most of them are democracies. You have the worst colonizers left the biggest messes behind, like DRC is one of the poorest countries on the planet. And it was the Belgians who colonized it. And the Belgians were terrible colonizers. The best of the colonizers were the British. So you're better off if you look at a country today. Those countries that were British colonies are better off than the countries of almost any other colonizer. And the worst were the Belgians.
So,
And
why though? What did the English do that was better than, say, the Belgians?
well, you didn't have any kind of government representation, but I would say that the British were more benign colonialists. They were, I would say, to some degree, benevolent colonists, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the Belgians, in many respects, were just evil. So Rwanda, for example, we've been to Rwanda, and Rwanda is famous in most of our minds for the genocide in 1994,
Right.
when the Hutus killed 1 million Tutsis in a country that only had 9 million people. So if you compare that to Colorado, that's like 750,000 Coloradans being murdered by the rest of the Coloradans. And so I thought the Hutus and the Tutsis were tribes. They're not tribes. They were a social construct of the Belgians. And it was part of the mechanism that they created to keep control of the people in Rwanda. And so you weren't a Hutu by genealogy, you were a Hutu by designation. You weren't a Tutsi by genealogy, you were a Tutsi by designation. And the Tutsis were designated Tutsis because they had the most assets. So the Tutsis had the most money.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as that matured, you had this big wealth inequality between Hutus and Tutsis, and that started to create
Resentment
by the Hutus. And then that also started being fed in part by the Belgians. And then the Belgians pulled out, and they had created this monster that the outcome of the monster was the Hutus just started openly murdering 1 million. In 100 days, Wendy, they murdered 1 million people.
So on
And
a slightly lighter impact so far, what I'm hearing is that you're saying that you had a government system in place that, in order to keep control of the people, created two separate tribal designations, even though they're not tribes, right? Separated people by those who had and those who did not have, right? And
right.
those who did not have got mad and murdered the people who did have, right?
Yeah.
So what you're
They
saying is
were,
a government's objective is to separate the people so that they fight with each other and not the government.
to a degree, yeah. And this resentment built up over years.
Right.
Okay. And so the triggering event, much like World War I, you remember World War I was started when the Kaiser was murdered, which resulted in, I think, Germany attacking, and then the whole world gets pulled into this conflagration. Well, the then president of Rwanda, who I think was a Hutu, because by then they were a democracy, and the Hutus had the overwhelming control of government. And so there were years that went by where the same things that we saw happen to the Jews in Germany happened. The Tutsis were designated, they were deprived of their businesses, they were persecuted, and so on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the president of Rwanda was flying into Kigali with the president of Burundi, which is next door, and their plane was shot out of the sky. And the president of Rwanda was killed. Well, no one's ever taken credit for the shooting down of the plane, but it's presumed by many that it was Hutus who shot down their own leader's plane in order to inflame the country against the Tutsis, because they blamed the downing of the airplane on the Tutsis, and that created open license on killing Tutsis. And so the typical means of murder was death by machete. So there were very few guns in the country, so they would go to their neighbors and machete them to death, and did all kinds of terrible things. Now, the remarkable thing about Rwanda is they actually have a benevolent dictator now, took over the country after the genocide. He ended the Hutus and the Tutsis. He outlawed those notions. He built infrastructure. They have a very functioning country. They have the best infrastructure I've seen, and it's a beautiful country. The natural beauty is stunning. So the other thing, by the way, that the colonizers did, and to some degree are still doing, is Africa is an incredibly natural resource rich continent. But those natural resources are still to this day being stripped out in many cases by the companies in the colonizing countries. So you go to DRC, which has some of the richest natural resources on the planet, and it's one of the poorest countries on the planet because a great deal of the wealth is immediately exported. So the natural resources are extracted, exported, the money leaves the country, and the people are just desperately poor.
I feel like this is making an argument for not having a government, because if you've got the government's going to negotiate with other countries, right, to have their businesses come in and take part and participate in whatever, because then you've got your export money coming into the government, but it not necessarily helping the people who are on the ground.
Well, no, the argument against not having a government is Somalia.
Okay,
so
tell me more.
if you, what's that?
I said, tell me more.
Well, if you take that to the extreme, probably the craziest country on the planet is Somalia. So Somalia is a country, used to have a government, used to have a president. The president was deposed. The central government was eliminated. And Somalia is ruled by warlords. So you remember the movie Black Hawk Down. So in Black Hawk Down, we under Clinton, we sent in special forces to take out one of the most evil warlords. And when they went in to take out the warlord, thousands of residents of Mogadishu came out armed and openly fighting against our small number of special forces. So we basically, after that, just said, okay, we're done. And we left. So I've talked to people from Somalia. Somalia has no infrastructure, right? So there's been no construction of infrastructure for many years now. They have no banking system. They have no currency. They have no laws. The only laws they have are laws made by warlords, right? It is your classic country of every man or woman for themselves. The principal currency in Somalia is dollars. You can't go into Somalia with a visa and pay for anything. They don't have any method to take a payment in a visa. It's a cash society. There's no capital in the country. There's no creation of capital. There's no investment. There's no business development. There's no employment. And so one of the largest economic drivers in Somalia is piracy. And it's a very dangerous, frightening country. So we're doing a thing in Kenya, our churches, called Trees for Food. It's a really awesome thing by our humanitarian department. We are contributing this time, we already contributed 400,000 fruit trees. We're contributing 200,000 banana, orange, avocado, and mango trees to be planted around Kenya, which in 18 months will be producing fruit. Well, for someone who receives one of those trees or has stewardship of those trees to plant it, they suddenly have a food source and they have an income source.
Right.
Okay. And they actually have more direct markets here than we have in the United States for food, because on every street, everywhere you go, are fruit stands. And so you can grow and get fruit to these fruit stands, and people can have a little fruit business, and there's thousands of them just around Nairobi. Okay. Well, so for somebody to have, and the fruit's great. I mean, they have great produce here. It's one of the most agriculturally friendly places on the planet. Climate's fantastic. The soil quality is excellent. Things grow year round. So this Trees for Food is providing people trees that will grow into a food source for them and an income source for them. And this will be the 600,000th trees that we've done here at the launch event of this. A community leader in Kajiado County in Gong Town. So you remember in Out of Africa, when it begins with, I owned a farm, and I had a farm in Africa at the base of the Ngong Hills. Well, that's spelled Ngong. Here they don't pronounce the N, they say Gong Hills. Now, Karen Blixen was Danish, and she called it Ngong Hills. Well, she was actually probably 25 kilometers from the Ngong Hills. Right at the base of the Ngong Hills is a town called Gong Town. And so we launched Trees for Food at Gong Town, and we had lots of Kajiado County leaders there. And they put on these big programs, and leaders of the community spoke, and leaders of our church spoke. And the last speaker was this woman, and she turned to Elder Matumbo, who was one of our senior leaders in Central Africa, and she said, Elder Matumbo, we want you to do this again, and next time we want 1 million trees.
That's awesome.
So I did the write-up on the day and posted it on the church newsroom, and I had that quote in there, and I showed it to Dennis, who works for Humanitarian Services, and he said, please take that quote out. I said, why? And he said, well, I'm not saying we won't do it, but we haven't agreed to that, and I don't want to have it in the story.
Right.
And so I changed the quote to her saying, we want you to come back and do this again. So next week, if we can nail down the schedule, the National Broadcasting Company of Kenya, it's called KBC, wants to interview one of our senior church leaders about Trees for Food. So I've arranged with the senior church leader, and I'll go out with him to the interview. He wants to take a couple of the local leaders, and they want to talk on this morning news program about what the church is doing with Trees for Food. So anyway, they were launching Trees for Food in a town on the Somali border. And I won't tell you the name of the town, but the town's on the Somali border. And our guys in Kenya called me and said, hey, Elder Richard, the next launch is in this town. And I looked at a map and I said, that's right on the Somali border. And they said, yeah. And I said, the national leaders are going there? They said, yeah, there's several cabinet ministers that are going to be there. And they said, it's perfectly safe. There will be lots of security. And I said, how do we get there? They said, well, you can drive, but we recommend that you can fly. Then we found out you couldn't actually fly because the flight schedules are really sketchy. So it's a 5-hour drive on 2-lane, not good roads. And I went up and got Elder Matumbo and said, hey, the next launch is next week in this town. Will you come? And he said, well, let me go talk to the area president. So he went to talk to the area president. The area president said, let's get security. So we have a church security specialist here. She came in and said, I don't know. That's right on the Somalia border. So they actually said, we're not, I mean, the government can provide its own security. We don't have that kind of security,
Right.
right? So we didn't go to that location. So in Somalia, you have a country that's really a country only because it has borders. It has a defined border.
Hmm.
And the other countries around it try to do everything they can to create or to prevent that chaos from leaking into their country. And there are refugee camps, but they keep the refugee camps out near Somalia. And it's a place of pretty much total hopelessness. So when you talk about you can make a case for not having a government, no, that's bad. That's Somalia. What the United States had, which was the best system in the world, was a government that recognized the proper role of government. In other words, the government was accountable to the people, not vice versa. The people weren't accountable to the government.
Hmm.
The government's principal role was to preserve the rights of the people. And we have enumerated rights,
Hmm.
right? The government's principal role economically was to just create the rules of the road by which we did commerce, but not to pick winners and losers and things like that, right? And so what came of those founding principles, was this amazing country called the United States of America, that's the richest country in the history of the world and has the greatest standard of living across the board in the history of the world. And that is the greatest place of opportunity in the history of the world. And the concern for the future of America is, will we lose our way?
Hmm.
So,
Well, and that's kind of what I'm getting at is that, we have a government system where we've got Republicans and Democrats, which have become extremely tribal. And I'm not going to say that we're going to start murdering each other, because God help us, we shouldn't be that bad. But you've got these two factions that are vehemently, at least the loud ones, yelling back and forth at each other, right? Then you've got a government
right.
who's currently, we won't say picking and choosing the winners, but when the government is doing overreaching bailouts, for example, of the banks, then you've got the government deciding who's winning and who's losing based on their interpretation of what's most beneficial for the people, as opposed to the people deciding what's most beneficial to the people. So the people are bailing out these businesses under the guise of the government is bailing them out, and they're not getting a say in the actual bailout. Much like we're not getting a say in proxy wars, we're not getting a say in the rebuilding in the military industrial complex. So all of these things, I mean, I'm not to say I love America. I absolutely love the way our country is the best. But I question, like, that's a slippery slope to suddenly we don't have control of our government, we don't have control of the direction of our country. Have we gone too far? Where's the fall point?
Well, okay, so that's the $1 billion question, Wendy. And you the fundamental challenge is when you reach a point as the government. So if you look at John Kennedy, John Kennedy would not recognize the Democrat Party of today. He probably barely recognized the Republican Party. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at John Kennedy and you say, what did John Kennedy value? He valued a strong defense. Well, he was a World War II veteran. He was a World War II hero. He saw the deprivations of war and the calamities of war, and he didn't want to see that repeated.
Mm-hmm.
And so he recognized the value of a strong national defense. He dramatically cut taxes. So when he took office, marginal tax rates were at 90%. And so he began dramatically cutting income taxes because he recognized that 90% income taxes were counterproductive to economic development.
Right.
And so he attacked that. He was a strong labor union guy, and back then labor unions were more useful than today. he was a strong labor union guy, but he was also he was a guy who was remarkable in his ability to tap into the American spirit and to say we're the can-do country. So if you go back in history, when he spoke in 1961 at Rice University in Houston, and he said, I believe that we should put a man on the moon before the end of this decade and return him safely. So if you think about this, Wendy, we had not launched a single man into space at the time he said that.
Mm-hmm.
So Scott Carpenter had not been launched into space yet. And the Russians had launched a man in space. And we were behind in the space race. And Kennedy threw down the gauntlet and he said, we do these things because they are hard. We don't do them because they're easy. And so what happened as a country, the whole country became catalyzed around this, this goal to land a man on the moon and return him safely. And incredibly, we did it in 8 years. And having lived through it and being mentally conscious during those years to remember Mercury, Gemini, Apollo 11, 12, 13, etc. It was incredible. It was stunning. It was so amazing to see what we were accomplishing. It was Kennedy who said in his inaugural address, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody talks about that today. And so what's happened is, sadly, in government, we've evolved to where now we're saying that the role of government is to create fairness. The role of government is to create equity. The role of government is to fairly distribute money, and so on and so forth. And so we have all of these bizarre things going on. And by the way, with all of these bizarre things that go on, you have structures that are built up to prosper in those bizarre structures.
Right.
Right. And you look and you go, oh my gosh, we've lost our way. So Sunday at church, I met this woman, our bishop in the congregation we attend, our bishop's sister was there. And she saw us and came over and talked to us. So in a typical church meeting, there are 3 white people in the church meeting. Carol, me, and another young missionary. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, one Sunday, there were 10 other white people, and that was a real curiosity. And I went over and introduced myself to them. And they were the family that own Costa Vida restaurants. So they own 100 Costa Vida restaurants, and they had safaried in Kenya before and were coming back for another safari. I told those guys if they'd open a Costa Vida here, they'd make a fortune, because we have nothing even remotely close to that. So this woman sees us Sunday, and she comes up and starts talking to us. Raised in Kenya, joined our church at 16, went on a mission at 21, developed the wonderful experience and life skills and spiritual skills of being a missionary, finished her mission, actually went to Idaho and enrolled at BYU, Idaho. Met her husband. The marriage ended because of something that only happens in America. Well, only happens in the Western world. Remarried. You're wondering what? I'll tell you when we're not recording.
Okay.
Okay. Remarried, and now lives in Vancouver, Washington. So here I'm talking to this woman, raised in Kenya, spent her first more than half of her life in Kenya, now living in Vancouver, Washington. Husband works for Microsoft. She works for the state of Oregon.
Right.
She has a college degree. They both have good jobs. They have a very nice home. She says to me, now, again, to have a Kenyan say this to you is so bizarre. She said, we live in the best place you can live in America financially. And I said, how's that? Well, I knew what she was going to say. She said, we live in Vancouver, so we have no income tax, but we shop in Oregon where there's no sales tax.
Nice.
And she said, so we basically pay no tax outside of federal income tax. And she said, it's great. And everybody in Vancouver understands that's the big Vancouver's just across the Columbia River from Portland.
Right.
And then she says to me, do you know how nuts Americans are? And I said, well, tell me. And she said, I could never do with my life what I've done in America. I could never do remotely close to what I've done in my life in Kenya. And I'm in America going, oh my gosh, this place is amazing. It's the absolute land of opportunity. It's like so abundant with possibilities. It's amazing. And she said, you can be anything you want to be here. Here's this Kenyan immigrant, Wendy, who is African, came to the United States with no advantages, right?
Right.
And just basically saw the system and said, I can be somebody here. And I can do things here. And she has a marvelous life. And she said, I'll tell you what drives me crazy about America. I said, what? She said, the people are nuts. They have no idea how good they have it.
No.
She said, nobody has any idea how good they have it. And they all have it better than anybody in the world. And they whine and complain. And she said, this whole thing about equity and so on, she said, just go work. Just go do your thing. Right. And if you're just willing to work and do your thing, the possibilities are endless. And I'm listening to her going, wow. So we golf most Mondays, not because I came here to golf, but because the missionary who's the executive secretary to the area presidency, I didn't even bring golf clubs. I didn't expect to play golf at all. The executive secretary to the area presidency golfs, and he lost his golf buddy. His golf buddy went home. And he was telling me that Ellis Backman went home. He didn't have anyone to golf with. And I said, oh, I'll golf with you. So I go golf with him. We golf at the Karen Country Club. Well, the Karen Country Club is named after Karen Blixen from out of Africa.
Okay.
The whole section of Nairobi called Karen is named after Karen Blixen from out of Africa. The golf course is on what was her coffee plantation. Okay. And so we play golf at the Karen Country Club. Every week we drive in and he speaks in Swahili to the guards at the country club. Just a greeting. And then he tells them, we play every Monday, and they wave us in. Nobody's a member. They wave us in. We go in to check in. And they say, are you members? No. Are you playing with a member? No. Okay, 3,500 shillings, which is like $20. So in one of the top country clubs in Kenya, we pay $20 to golf. I rented clubs until I bought a used set of clubs through the caddy. You have to have a caddy, and the caddy costs an enormous 1,400 shillings, which is $10. And so we tip him 600
So the caddy
shillings.
makes more than the guard?
Well, we don't tip the guard anything.
No, but if the caddy's making 400 shillings.
Oh, yeah. The caddy makes a lot more money than our apartment guard. Oh, yeah. Being a caddy's a great job.
Sign me up. Okay, go on.
So we pay, it cost me with caddy and tip, it cost me $35 to golf at a country club. And I have a caddy dedicated to me, not carrying 2 bags. So like if you go to Pebble Beach and you get a caddy, he's going to carry 2 bags. Right?
Okay.
Here we get an individual caddy. He's right with you. He wades out into the forest, or there who knows what out in the forest when I hit a ball out there.
Are there wild animals out there? Just curious, because I know you're across from the preserve.
There's not lions and leopards and cheetahs and things like that, but there's warthogs and there's I can't remember, high some things. There's not hyenas. There's probably monkeys. There's snakes. But he goes wandering out in the forest, and the guy's amazing. He almost always finds my golf ball. I tell him, you know, I pay for you with the money you save me on golf balls.
Right.
So that's golfing in Kenya. Well, his name's Joseph, delightful guy, a professional caddy. He says to me, I've wanted to go to America all my life. Really? He says, yes, I've never won the lottery. So it's a lottery to be able to get immigration passage to go to the United States.
How
So the
many people
US
are in
holds
the lottery?
immigration. Hmm?
How many people do they hold in the lottery?
I
Like,
don't
how
know
many
how
people are
many.
trying to get through?
Oh, a lot, a
Okay.
lot. And it's a lottery. And he said to me, do you know how much a caddy makes in America? I said, yeah. He said, you do? I said, yes, I've used caddies multiple times. And he said, it's amazing. So he'd love to go to America, but um, he can't get immigrant status. And he told me, I'm too old now. He's close to 60. He said, I'm too old now to be selected. So I've lost my chance to go. But my life dream is to go to America and to live in America. So that's kind of the part of this about how amazing America is and how underappreciated America is and how there are so many things that we have in America. So I don't know if we visited this yet when we saw you. There's a slum here called the Kibera slum. Did we tell you about that?
Yeah, but you should tell me again since that one got lost.
So the Kibera slum is the largest urban slum in Africa. And they unapologetically call it a slum. So I ran into at a novelty shop one day. I ran into a woman from New York City and I asked her where she was from. And she said, from New York City. And I said, what do you do? And she said, I work for a nonprofit in New York City that's working on eliminating urban poverty. And I said, so what are you doing in Nairobi? And she said, oh, we've been here for a week having a training session. And I said, where'd you spend the week? And she said, well, we're at a hotel. So she tells me the hotel, very nice hotel. So they came to Nairobi, went to a very nice hotel. And as far as I could tell, didn't really see any of the actual poverty. I mean, you can see it around you, but weren't up close and personal. And I said, so like you didn't go into the Kibera slum? And she said, no, but we don't call it that. I said, what do you call it? She said, we call it a transitional settlement. Yeah. And I said, it's not transitional. And she said, well, they have to start thinking about it as transitional. And I said, they don't think about it as transitional. It's where they live. And they call it the Kibera slum. The people who live there call it the Kibera slum. And they don't act like, poor, pitiful me. So we go, and Carol's been in more times than I have. We go in and we spend a whole morning in the Kibera slum. And for somebody who's never seen anything like that, it's just shocking. Mm-hmm. So the typical home is a 10 by 10 shack. And it's framed by, so that's 3 meters by 3 meters. It's framed by, imagine long tree limbs, not like 2x4s,
right?
Long tree limbs, and tin or corrugated metal tacked to it around the outside, and then on the top, corrugated metal tacked on the top. No running water anywhere in the slum. No, 800,000 people live in the Kibera slum. No running water, no plumbing, no electricity. Now, they had an outlet, and I asked them where they got the electricity. Well, they run long cords out to the main power lines, and they just hijack power into the slum, and then they basically spread it out with these extensions of, or long extension cords, mm-hmm. Right? And periodically people get injured or killed out trying to hijack power. And so they might be able to operate a 60-watt light bulb or a little portable television in the slum. They cook over like little backpacking camp stoves, mm-hmm. Right?
Right.
And we went to Kevin's parents' house, who've lived in there for years. And their places, they have 3 kids still at home, and then the husband and wife, they live in a 10 by 20. So they have a rug or a blanket separating the room. The 3 boys sleep in one bed in the 10 by 10 room next to them, and the mom and dad sleep on a couch and chair out in the sitting area. I will tell you that everywhere we went, people were smiling. They were happy. They came up and wanted to see us and talk to us and high five us and fist bump us. And it was incredible to see that. We visited a school called Future Star School. And this school's a private school. There's public schools in Khyber Islam, but you have to pay money to go to them. Most of the people can't afford the money, or they can't afford it consistently. So they'll go to like a quarter, and then they can't afford a quarter. So they pull the kids out, and then they'll go to another quarter. And so in addition to and there's huge crowds that want to get into the public schools. There's some private schools. So this Future Star School is led by these women. The assistant director's name is Maisie. And in addition to the school that has about 150 kids in it, they have 26 orphans.
Mm-hmm.
And those 26 orphans sleep, the boys in a room and the girls in a room, on bunk beds with mattresses that saw their best days 30 years ago. So Marie, our friend from Canada, who's here, her husband's the church's paid lawyer here. In what we're doing, we meet these really interesting people. He was a legal executive for Shell Oil and knew one of the senior leaders of our church. And when he retired from Shell, the senior leader said to him, "So what are you going to do now?" And he said, "Well, Marie and I are retired, and we have 5 kids. We have 5 kids, and we're going to do some traveling and go see our kids. And I might play more golf, and we'll serve in the church." And Bishop Cosé said, "Okay." Well, 6 months later, he gets a phone call from the general counsel of the church. "Dave, how would you feel about moving to Nairobi and being our lawyer in Central Africa?" So Dave and Marie moved here, and they're lovely people. And in the small world thing, the first time I met Dave, he's telling me where they're from, and I hadn't really paid attention to his last name. He doesn't wear a name tag like me. And I said, "Well, I have some friends from Canada in my stake at home." And he said, "Really? What's their names?" I said, "Don Bailey and Leslie Stanford." He said, "You know Don and Leslie?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Leslie's my cousin." So here I'm in Kenya. I meet this lawyer who's living in Nairobi, whose cousin is a friend of ours in Denver.
Yeah, it's a small world.
Yeah. So anyway, Marie's daughters, who are kind of, they have this great heart, 2 young, early 20s, single girls until January 2nd. One of them's getting married. I think Emma's getting married. They go to Khyber Islam, and they're so like, oh my gosh. They go home and they start a GoFundMe for the Khyber Islam, and from their friends, they raised $700. And then some friends of ours from Denver came here, and Bill and Janice said, "Hey, is there anything we can do to help?" And Carol said, "You should go out to Khyber Islam." So we set him up with Kevin, who's the guy who took us in. They go out to Khyber Islam. Bill was flying out later that day. He had $700 in cash, and he gave them all of the cash. So between Bill's $700 and Marie's $700, they bought 26 mattresses for this orphanage, right?
Right. That's awesome.
And so you see now what these kids have. And when you go in there and see, remember, there's the only toilet facilities they have are latrines that were built by the Gates Foundation. But the people who own property in the slums, you have to clean the latrines. So they want people to pay to use the latrines. So they lock the latrine unless you pay to use the latrine. Well, people don't have money to pay to use the latrine. And so they just do what they've always done.
Mm-hmm.
And so most people never use the latrines that the Gates Foundation donated to the Khyber Islam. So I told Marie, we should go in and talk to them and find out if we can get to the property owners. How much would we have to contribute so that they can pay somebody to clean the latrines and just open it to the people there? Right? Because it's so silly to have these latrines that the Gates Foundation paid for that nobody uses.
Right. Good
Right.
intentions. Mm-hmm.
So so in the mission here, we have there's a lot of structures that in the church today that didn't exist when I was a young missionary. Like, we didn't have doctors in the missions. We didn't have psychologists in the missions. We didn't have lawyers in the areas, So not only do we have a paid lawyer, but he has 2 volunteer lawyers who are missionaries like us, and their mission is to be lawyers. So I'm standing one day with Dave, the paid lawyer, who could be living a life of ease in Calgary, Canada right now. And he's busy as can be. And most of the legal issues the church has are two-fronted. Number one, maintaining the church's legal status in all the countries that we're in and trying to get legal status in countries we're not in. And 2, real estate issues. So they don't, in many of the countries of Africa, respect property rights the way we do in the United States, which is another one of those fundamental economy building things. If you own something, it's yours.
Right.
And they're kind of iffy on that whole
We
front.
are too.
I don't know. Not like here. So anyway, so I'm standing here talking to Dave, the lawyer who uprooted his life to come to Kenya. And next to Dave is one of the 2 missionary lawyers who retired from his legal practice, where he was billing $300 or $400 an hour, and he's now working full-time for the church for free. And next to him is the psychologist who has a PhD in psychology and had a very active counseling practice in Southern California. And she now has 1,800 missionaries she's the mental health coach for. And she's a missionary, meaning she's paying to be here. She's not paid to be here. And next to her is the physician who was a family physician in a small town in Utah, and then retired from that and went and taught at a medical school for 5 years. And he's the physician to those 1,800 missionaries. And then you have Carol and me, business owners. And I said to him, what other church could pull this off?
Right.
I mean, look at this group of people. Nobody in the world could pull this off. And it's because the church is so incredibly awesome. And so people like all of us, our good friends, the Cooks, just got here this week, a week ago today. And Phil sold his business and was finally able to retire. And here he is out in Mombasa with nobody around, basically on an island. And you go, that's amazing. And they're serving because they love the Lord, they love the gospel, they love the people. And I look around and go, this is incredible. So it's a remarkable thing. And then you see the people in the church and the growth of the church and the maturity of the church. And our role is not to run the church here. Our role is to strengthen the church here in our various capacities, because the people who live here are the people who have to, over generations, administrate the church here. And like I said, the church is remarkable. Now, there's things that you just watch the maturation in our little ward. It's a ward. We meet in a little rented building that doesn't have a chapel. It has just a multi-purpose room with chairs. It has a microphone with a speaker on the wall. It has an electric piano that nobody can play. The room acoustics are terrible. So even when the microphone's working, you can barely hear what people are saying. So I wrote, if you read this, I'm sitting in church one day, Carol was with me that day, and the guy conducting, the only thing I could understand was my name. And there were 4 new converts being confirmed that day. And I heard my name, and I turned around to the American missionary, and I said, Elder Fowers, did he just announce my name? And he said, yes. And I said, why? And he said, he wants you to join the circle when they confirm and give the Holy Ghost to these 4 people. Oh, okay. So I don't know any of the 4 people who've been baptized. No, I was at their baptism the week before, but I didn't meet any of them. So there's 4 of us in the circle. So the bishop confirms and bestows the Holy Ghost to the first one, and then they rotate. And I thought, I'm going to be in the rotation. And I don't even know this guy's name, right? And their names aren't like Wendy Campbell.
They should be.
So rotate again. I'm one closer. Rotate again. The bishop says, Elder Archer, will you confirm this one? I said, sure. And I leaned down and said, tell me your name very slowly and let me repeat it back to you. And I said, Bishop, listen and make sure I get it. So he tells me his name. I had to hear it like 3 times, repeated it back to him, said it back to myself, and then confirmed him.
Nice.
Nice. So last Sunday we go to church. Carol says to me, primary is the kids' class or classes. Carol wanted to go to Relief Society, which is the women's class. What's that?
I have 3 minutes. I have a meeting.
Carol wanted to go to Relief Society. Mm-hmm. So she goes to Relief Society. The primary people come and grab her and say, hey, you need to teach primary. So she always goes prepared. So she goes in and teaches primary. We finish the sacrament meeting, and a member of the bishopric comes up and says, Elder Archer, you're teaching priesthood meeting. I said, okay, what's the subject? And he says, Elder Anderson's talk from General Conference, which I can get on my phone. I said, give me 5 minutes. So we have a 10-minute break before. So I pull up the talk, I read through it, I highlight sections, and then boom, I'm on, and I had to teach for 50 minutes. And they're like awesome experiences. So I didn't really get much into Africa. I will tell you in the few minutes we have left, Kenya's beautiful. I told you about the craziness of driving. You know, you start getting used to those things. It's still, I mean, when we went to Rwanda, they drive on the right side of the street. And so I'm like, what? They're all driving on the wrong side of the street, right? You still at times click the signal, the turn signal when you need to, or excuse me, you click the windshield wiper when you need to click the turn signal. And you understand the system with roundabouts, but it's still not anything. Driving is not anything anyone in America has ever experienced. And you kind of, as we drove the cooks around to give them kind of a sense of how you drive, I said to him, driving in Kenya is kind of a game of golden rule chicken. And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, you see cars coming at you, and the question is, who's going to go and who's going to stop? Because when you go into roundabouts, you got cars coming from all kinds of directions. And the question is, who's going to stop and who's going to go? And you watch and figure out. And so the golden rule chicken is, at some point, someone has to go, and at some point, someone has to stop. Right?
Right.
And so going into a roundabout, I used to, like, my heart rate would go up just knowing I got a roundabout coming.
Right.
And now when I go to a roundabout, I'm thinking, okay, what lane do I want to be in? How am I going to signal? What have I got to watch? Well, what am I going to do here? Google Maps is pretty amazing for a country that has no addresses. You know, you just put in the name of, like, I want to go to such and such Italian restaurant, and Google Maps finds it, and they can take you down some roads that are amazing that anyone even knows are there. So
in 60 seconds, tell me what the next month looks like or the next 3 months look like for you. And then we're going to do this again, and we're going to talk more about what's been going on while you're there.
Well, the next 3 months. So in December, in the church worldwide, we have what's called Light the World. And the church yesterday did a really, really cool thing in Times Square in Manhattan. So Light the World is a worldwide thing, and it's basically saying to the whole world, Jesus Christ is the light of the world. He should be in your life. And it's a December focus for the whole church with local implementation.
Mm-hmm.
So in Times Square, which, as you know, is one of the most vibrant places on the planet, simultaneous with the rollout of the giving machines, the church had arranged for 15 digital displays on Times Square. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Right.
And those digital displays are simultaneously showing nativity, the nativity story. Was really, really cool. So the pictures I've seen, I want to see video of them, but the pictures I've seen are just stunning. Well, so next week we have a concert at the mall with the choir from the church that we had to arrange.
Mm-hmm.
We have about 60 service projects going on all around Central Africa. So every congregation received money from the church to go in and do a service project. So we have service projects going on all over Central Africa. And our role is to get to those we're proximate enough to get to, but we have people who've been called in their local areas. And we hope that the training is getting to the end of the row. So we want every one of the service projects to be covered so that we can publish them on local media if we have local media relationships, on the church newsroom. And we'll have this amazing thing. We're all over Central Africa. This awesome service is going on in life-changing ways in the month of December. So we'll be tracking all of that for December. And then on December 21st, we're going up to Sweetwater, which is at the base of Mount Kenya, which is the second highest mountain in Kenya. We're going to spend 3 days at Sweetwater, which is a game reserve, and we'll see everything you think of with African wildlife. We'll stay out in safari tents. These are not roughing it tents. They have wood floors, they have bathrooms, they have generators, but yeah, it's glamping. They're tents. And will be 3 days of safari and 2 nights there. We're going with 6 couples, which will be fun. We will keep working, Light the World. We'll keep writing stories. We'll keep working on training the field. We had a big seminar a week and a half ago here where we had people from all over Central Africa. Now we got to work with getting that training down to the local level. So we've trained the heads of the countries. Now we got to get it to the local levels. Going into January, we have a senior leader in January, we'll start negotiating with broadcast stations to broadcast our general conference in April. So a guy from Salt Lake Bonneville International is coming over, Bonneville. And we'll see if I go with him, but he'd like me to go with him and Carol to some of these countries. We may or may not go. We'll see what the budget situation is, but he'll be out negotiating broadcasting contracts in all the countries that we're in to show our general conference. And we haven't found a broadcast partner in Ethiopia, which is a huge country. So that's a focus to get into Ethiopia. So that's going to be January, is getting these contracts into place.
Right.
In February, we have one of the senior leaders of our church coming, which that's always a lot of work for communications and communicating his arrival to public entities and then capturing it here and writing it up and so on and following him around. And in doing that, Carol and Marie want to start engaging at the Kibera Slum at the Future Star School and start teaching regularly. We found this orphanage that we spent a half day serving at that we're going to go out to next week, and we want to consistently go out there. They serve 1,200 people from the community every day. And so we want to start going out and seeing how we can help the people in the orphanage who are just, when we had the event where 20 of us went out there, Bernice asked me to make comments to the kids and everybody else there. And I said to Bernice and her mother, Diana, I said, you two are angels from God who are here doing God's work. And you're so amazing, and we love you for it, and we plan to continue to be with you. So we'll be working, if they accept our contributions, we'll be serving there in the orphanage. We'll keep attending church and doing whatever they need us to do in church. And, staying in touch with home and
Nice. Then in
We
February,
talked to
we're
our
going to bring
kid.
you back on, and we're gonna talk about all the things that you did and how they went. Mhm.
All right, have fun. See ya.
Okay. I'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.